I'm Sean Kidney. I'm the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. We're going to be talking usability of the EU taxonomy with my three fellow technical expert group members, my good friends, and we have become good friends over the last 18 months. First, Brenda Kramer, who's the Senior Advisor of Responsible Investment. That was the last title I heard, at PGGM, which is a huge Dutch pension fund and essentially an asset owner, although technically there's a board above it, but we're going to call Brenda representing the asset owner sector today. We have Helena Viñes Fiestas, who's the Global Head of Stewardship and Policy at BNP Paribas Asset Management, and is representing the asset manager voice today. And we'll think about points from that perspective. And finally, we have Jose Luis Blasco, who's the Global Sustainability Director of Acciona, that is an incredibly progressive energy company in Spain, and who is also, as a spare time, speechwriter to CEOs and chairman, and that's what he's been doing this morning for their AGM that's coming up. We're going to have a conversation on the EU taxonomy, its usability, but just a couple of points first. The EU taxonomy is something that's been developed for 18 or more than 18 months now. We published at the beginning of March our recommendations of the Commission. These recommendations will form the basis of a regulation that's already been agreed in principle and in practice by the Commission, the Parliament and the Member States, but there's a little bit of drafting work and detailed work underway at the moment. That'll be finalised later this year. I will ask Helena to pick up the timing of that a little bit more in her remarks in a minute. The key thing about this particular proposal as part of the action plan on sustainable finance for the European Union is this is a foundation piece of work. It informs the climate risk disclosure regulation, where if you're going to disclose sustainable investments, they've got to be in line with the taxonomy. It is the reference tool for the green bond standard, and it will become the reference tool for many other measures being taken in the current thinking in the European Union about green transition and green stimulus. Of course, we're in the middle of a crisis now, which is a COVID crisis. We do need to understand that this is a crisis rooted in environmental degradation. The pathogens jump between species when ecosystems are stressed. This particular pathogen came from bats in southern China. The MERS virus came from bats in Egypt. Stressed ecosystems lead to these kinds of changes. This has been predicted by the International Panel of Climate Change's Health Committee for the last 25 years and by the World Health Organization. More to the point, they've said on current trajectories of climate change, we can expect to have series of pandemics throughout the 21st century. This is our test. This is our first climate shock. Climate change won't happen in a linear fashion. It'll happen in a series of significant shocks. It'll be significant heat incidences that will lead to the failure of the North American wheat crop one year, as happened in Russia in 2010, and consequent impact on food supplies globally. It'll be typhoons and hurricanes of intensities that we have never seen before. 3 times the current intensity is what's predicted by mid-century, and consequent damage to the economies that are affected in the path of these storms. Huge damages we might expect. And things like pandemics and things like wars that arise out of failed states that are hit by climate shocks. We're in a race now, 2 races really at the same time. One is to learn from the current crisis what we have to do to become more resilient in the future. And we discuss resilience in the taxonomy in terms of infrastructure resilience and asset resilience. But we know we need to also look at social, economic, ecosystem resilience measures. And that's part of our forward work. We've got a live test now of what kinds of measures to prepare a health system for future crises work. We've already seen in East Asia, thanks to SARS, a whole lot of investments that were made in preparation for events like temperature checks at Hong Kong airport, which have helped them better manage the pandemic than, say, we've done in Europe or the US. These are examples. I appreciate people don't think about them, but these are climate resilience measures when you understand that these crises are rooted in climate. We experience climate change as heat stress, as floods, as storms, as wars, as pandemics, not as warming temperatures. And that's the lesson out of this. Social protection measures are also essential if we're going to look at a century of climate shocks. The hard and really, really vicious lesson we're learning in the US at the moment, where we didn't have free healthcare for the poor, means they weren't able to go to doctors when they started getting sick, and they kept on working and the virus kept spreading. This means that if we want to ensure pandemics can be addressed, we need to be thinking about our health systems in the context of a crisis. It's a big agenda. And of course, the second line is we need to be thinking about inoculating against future climate shock. If we don't get our emissions down 50% in 10 years, 50% in 10 years, according to the International Panel of Climate Change 1.5 degree report, we can consign ourselves to a future of catastrophic climate change. And frankly, there's no certainty that we will even survive that. There is a certainty that the impacts will be way beyond what we can imagine at the moment. So that's the job. Green stimulus is absolutely critical coming out of this recovery. We have to build back better, build for a future. The taxonomy provides a framework for that. It's a procurement plan for the Paris Agreement. This is what it is. It's a shopping list. And we can make that a framework for quick interventions in terms of recovery funding, biasing towards it. We're seeing this in Europe. It's exciting to see Frans Timmermans, the Vice President, talking about the need to build back better. It's exciting to see Ursula von der Leyen talk about the need to build back better. And we've seen some significant announcements so far. In fact, Helena, we saw a big one yesterday. Tell us what we heard yesterday.
Okay, so yesterday the Commission announced the recovery plans. It announced that amounts to 750 billion euros. So, you know, a pretty decent amount, I would say. And it also announced that it has their intention to create an instrument, a new recovery instrument that they call, and I need to read this because it's just been announced, it has a very long name. It's Europe's Moment, Repair and Prepare for the Next Generation. And this new instrument has basically three pillars. The first pillar is to support member states with investments and reforms. And here there's also a proposal to boost the Just Transition Fund up to 40 billion euros. So pretty good. And to help the member states, not only to recover, but also to assist them in accelerating the transition towards climate neutrality. So really good news. The second pillar is to kickstart the EU economy by incentivizing the private investments. This includes an upgrade on the investment EU to a level of 15.3 billion euros to mobilize private investments, and then a new strategic investment facility that sort of builds on the investment EU to generate investments up to 150 billion euros. And here is to boost resilience of strategic sectors, particularly those links to the green and digital transition. Now, the third pillar is on a new health program and research, which is very much needed, but I think I'm going to leave that to a side as it is outside of our remit. Now, the very good news is that the proposal also proposes the, you know, a little bit redundant, but also puts forward the taxonomy as the guide for the recovery. In concrete, and that translates into concretely that public investments should respect the principle and the letter of the do no significant harm embedded in the taxonomy, and that the investment guidelines for the new solvency support instrument should also reflect, you know, the need to prioritize green investments following the taxonomy. Also, what we've seen is that there's going to be some changes to the EU budget, you know, to boost the budget. But however, the Commission, and very right so, upholds its commitments that 25% of that budget will be deployed on climate, you know, for climate transition, and that it will follow the taxonomy. So overall, really good news. The taxonomy will have a prominent role. Of course, you know, the devil is on the detail, and we still need to know more about how exactly it will disentangle and how exactly it will materialize. But really good boost for the taxonomy. Last but not least, I also want to say that following the recommendation of France and Germany, and you remember last week with Nick, you and I, we were discussing the statement that the French and the German government had put forward. The Commission reiterates the need to revise the 2030 targets to 50 to 55% emissions reduction, but also 40% share of renewables and 40% of energy savings. On one hand, it also says that we will need to revise the carbon markets, the ETS, and broaden the scope and tighten it up. And last but not least, you know, the carbon border tax seems to gain momentum, and I think it might become a reality. So that's the news so far.
Thank you. So the new targets that Helena's just mentioned, by the way, are not something, something which is just an NGO. Look, this is what the IPCC 1.5 degree report said we need to do. This is a government listening to the scientists. We spent 30 years not listening to the scientists. This is why we're in the mess we're in. Emissions have gone up while we've been talking and saying, yes, we'll get there, climate scientists. I know it's tough, we can't quite. And now we're beginning to listen. And that's the exciting thing. It's a proud day to be a European Union citizen. I'm very proud at the moment. But it's not just the European Commission. I mean, Jose Luis in the Spanish government, for example, we saw a very interesting announcement about fossil fuels. Can you tell us what that was?
Yes, I think that we are in a new area where, as you said, the governments are listening to the scientists, and I think that this is the way that we will live in the coming years. I'm not sure how these governments have the capability to implement in practice this kind of knowledge, but they're on their way. I think that we need to be optimistic.
But the Spanish government's announcement is the stopping of all future fossil fuels. Is that correct? In energy generation?
We have three main measures. We are up to 70% of the renewables. That this is a 4 points more than in the previous target. We are banning all the investment from the public sector in fossil fuels. Right. We are introducing fossil fuel zones or low carbon zones in the municipalities in 2023, and we have also to get them neutrality in 2050 by law. That is a thing that I think is a mixture between practical examples, practical measures, and also great ambitions for the long term. And I think that is a very good cocktail of measures.
Yeah, I also understand that what it said is that it will not give any new concessions for any fossil fuels projects, and that it will phase out the subsidies. So really reinforcing that move to 100% renewable electricity generation, which is the target by 2050.
This is the target. We have some, as you said, the devil is in the details, but this is the mainstream.
Yes.
So Brenda, while we're grieving and mourning for our losses, and that's not over yet, we're likely to have a second wave before the end of the year.
Yeah.
Pandemic, and that is the nature of pandemics. And I was, I note that the story in the Dutch newspapers of Mark Rutte's loss of his mother, the Prime Minister, in the middle of it, who he couldn't see because of his isolation principles, was just so poignant. It made the papers here. All of us are having similar experiences with friends or colleagues going. Yeah. While we're in the middle of that, at least there's some silver lining to the appreciation. I mean, I imagine it's the same as you. Here, I can't believe how clean the air is and how many young people are saying, why can't the air be always clean? Let alone the fact that emissions are down. Why has it been so hard to get emissions down? They are suddenly way, way down. Hanging on to this seems to give us an air of possibility, don't you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's funny, we live in a very open space, and we're actually enjoying the blue sky without any airplane stripes, you know, look up, we don't see anything. And it's amazing. And how if I look at myself personally, it's funny how, you know, clearly I miss seeing you guys and miss seeing some of the people that I've worked with internationally, but many of the trips that we did weren't super necessary or could have been done like this. So I really hope that we take some of this after the crisis, which you rightly say will probably, and this virus is going to live with us for quite a while. But it's amazing how it indeed opens up new opportunities in the European Union, in Spain, but also in personal life.
Absolutely. So now let's have a look at the taxonomy and the usability of it. This session is about the application usability. It is not about the detail of individual criteria. We have a whole series of webinars, including with other members of the TEG, including Brenda, Jose Luis, and Helena, to look at that. You can get those at climatebonds.net/webinars. You can get podcast recordings at Spotify, Apple, and Google if you wish to. Today, Helena, maybe I can start with you. Can you tell us just in this, what can you tell us is required and not required in relation to the taxonomy regulation that's coming through? What have we got to worry about?
Yeah. So I think that for everyone, they have to keep three things in mind. And I think these three things actually highlight to what extent the taxonomy is a game changer. Yeah. The first one are the legal obligations. So basically, and I will allow then Jose Luis and Brenda to develop on that. Basically, what we have is for corporates and for investors, they need to disclose the percentage in the case of companies. They need to say how and to what extent their activities are associated with taxonomy eligible activities and what is the percentage of their revenues or turnover and capex and opex that relates to the taxonomy. For investors, it is at fund level and is the percentage of the fund that actually is aligned with the taxonomy, whether you count it in terms of revenues or in terms of capex. And Brenda can develop on that later on. Now, the third type of obligations is actually for the EU and the member states. And what the obligation is to, if they develop any standard or any label for financial products, they need to use, for green financial products, they need to use the taxonomy as the reference. This is why the EU Green Bond Standard, that also the TEG work on, and the coming eco-label are based on the taxonomy. Now, what is the...
So yes? just to be clear, I'm a fund manager in Germany, and I want to put out a product to attract investors and call it sustainable. I can't make up my own definitions anymore. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is you are more than free to invest in whatever you want. You are more than free, you know, in the sense of, and on top of it, there is no minimum requirement. So your fund doesn't have to be as a minimum, it doesn't have to have a minimum threshold, yeah, of taxonomy alignment. So it can be 0.2, it can be 90%, yes? You are free to do whatever you want. However, by law, if you're marketing your product as green or has any environmental characteristics, you need to say how it relates to the taxonomy and what is your the percentage of your fund that actually aligns with the taxonomy, right? And people need to really understand the importance of this, because although, as I said, there's no legal requirement, and this is exclusively an reporting obligation, there are two things to keep in mind. One is the policy ramifications. So let me explain this to you. The taxonomy operates as a common measurement tool, right? We said that everyone will have to say, my fund is 2% or is 50%, whatever it is. But the beauty of the taxonomy is that it is one piece of a bigger puzzle. And part of the action plan, it is also a change in MiFID regulation. So there's going to be an amendment to MiFID, which basically says that it is compulsory, you know, to ask your clients, whether we're talking about institutional investor or whether you're talking about a retail investor, their preferences in terms of environmental social preferences. So the same way that when you go to the bank and they give you a test in terms of your level of risk, they will ask you about your environmental social preferences. And guess what? If you say, I am really concerned about the environment, you're going to be put forward different funds. And one will be 0.2% aligned, the other might be 60% aligned. What would you choose? And can I say, I'll go farther and say the importance of the eco label is double. One is because it's the first ever European label, and we need the European labels because we need to reduce transaction costs. This is about one market unit. So just the opposite, one market, yeah? The second point is that we're not asking people to know anything about the taxonomy. We're not asking people to know about finance. The same way that I am so ignorant when it comes to chemistry. But when I go to the supermarket and I see a detergent and I see the eco label, I know that by buying that product, you know, I'm doing no harm to the environment. And that's exactly what, you know, when you look at all the different pieces of the regulation, like for instance, we still don't know, but on prudential requirements, the taxonomy, we don't know what role the taxonomy will play on central banks, on credit rating agencies. You know, we're seeing now the power of the taxonomy at public sector level. It has to be said that within the Renew Sustainable Finance Strategy, one of the key areas of the consultation is precisely what role the taxonomy should play on green budget and green procurement. And that's besides the green recovery. So the taxonomy is a game changer. It's becoming the reference. And just to finish, to say, if, you know, any national label, as I said, like Greenfin in France, will have to change its taxonomy and use the EU taxonomy. But that's not compulsory for private labels, like the Green Lux Black or Febelfin in Belgium. However, the question is, you know, to what extent will they be able to justify not using the taxonomy? To what extent actually the market is going to accept any other standard that is not the taxonomy, given, you know, all the interlinks between the different pieces of regulation?
Thank you. This suggests, though, that we're going to be able to get data to inform this new common language for Europe around this topic. And I wanted to ask Jose Luis, actually, because you've been doing this, how hard is this really to apply and to get the data and find information? You've been applying to corporate structure.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be able to give Brenda what she needs?
Oh, I think it is easier that because sometimes when you see that the technical reports, probably you are scary about. Could you put the next slide, because I want to explain in couple of slides how we develop this exercise. First of all, you need some ingredients to put in practice the taxonomy. We recommend to have a couple of guys from the CFO team and a couple of guys of your sustainability team. For the first step is to have a look about how far you are of the activities related to the taxonomy. You need another thing, a cup of coffee, because it's not very easy. You have your cup of coffee, you have your review, and you can do it. Very simple, because probably only having a look to the index of the technical document, you have an idea about how obvious the areas of activities of your company is linked with the activities are related to the taxonomy, because the lines are very clear, very clear. You can say, okay, I'm a company make storage in thermal energy or cogenerating or water collection. Is very easy. You only need to have a look to this first. Second, if you have activities in this list, please, could you give me the favor to the next slide? You need to develop a second analysis, a little bit more sophisticated but simple. That is inside this activity, if your asset is making a substantial contribution to the climate change mitigation or adaptation. Let me give you an example. We have in our company transmission and distribution networks. business. Okay, one click, please. And we developed this exercise for 3 assets last year. One in Spain, that is Subestación de Cubillos, and I have a photo here. You can see this is a beautiful biomass power plant. The second is Topolobampo, that is in Mexico, and this is the second photo is a combined cycle from a client, not from Acciona. And the third is a Bob Goya, also in Spain, that this is a windmill site. Obviously, the taxonomy gives you a threshold, a criteria in order to classify your activities in or out of this substantially contribution. Obviously, if you have a transmission line with less of 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, you are contributing to this to empower to develop renewables in the country, and these activities are in. We have only 2, because the third, that is a climate, this is a carbon a gas combined cycle plant, will be up of the 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt.
And you haven't got carbon capture and sequestration yet?
In this is I not, because it's a site from a client, but in this case in Mexico, probably they are thinking, but it's not already done.
Fair enough.
Okay, this is the second exercise. You need to review your assets included in this activity in order to know if this is up or down, or is above or not on the other thresholds. And believe me, this is very simple, because the criteria are 1 or 2, and it's very simple for many of the companies. The next step is, okay, the third criteria is the famous do not significant harm criteria. Okay, this is also very famous, but also very sensible in terms of the criteria. If you are contributing to one goal or target or environmental objective, please don't damage another environmental objectives. And also to know if you are in or out in these activities, I give you another example. We have electric transportation. We built metros around the world. We have the metro for example, the metro of Sydney, Dubai, Quito, many metros around the world. And we have a list of the metros that we are building last year. But the do no significant harm impose one criteria, very relevant: 80% of the waste that we are taking. And believe me, when you are building a tunnel, you have a lot of waste to manage. 80%, you need to recycle that. And this is not possible in many jurisdictions. Please, one click. And for all of these assets, we only have 4 in line with this criteria. Most of the 80% of the waste should be recycled. And we take only these 3 assets into our taxonomy exercise. The fourth criteria that is also very relevant, please one click, and final criteria is about if your activity is complying with the minimum social safeguards. In this case, with the OECD multinational principles. In our case, we have very strong system for years, auditing and due diligence procedures that allows us to audit these kind of projects. But many of the companies, sure, you have also mechanisms in place in order to review if your operations are in line with the human rights practices, global compact, and another procedures that are very similar to the OECD multinational principles. And to give you some size about the project, we are talking about 4 people, 2 from the CFO team, 2 from the sustainability team, working 4 weeks. And we are a very complex company because we have 12 activities and around 2,000 assets around the world in 30 countries. This is not easy to have. Only in 4 weeks, for people, review with the cost accounting system and also the sustainability indicators, and provide an insight to the auditors about how we are aligned. Another and final slide, you can find there a lot of materials that we have prepared for you, because now we are very interested that many companies use this kind of methodology because two things. One is because we need to have a critical mass in order to make to make it happen in terms, and the second is because we think that it's an opportunity for the green companies, for the sustainable companies or sustainable purpose companies to capture also the opportunities of the green recovery. And now is the opportunity. You can find a lot of information in this document, and also in our recently published integrated report. That is the next click, Son, because here you have also the taxonomy divided by our divisions. Not only about the company, you have every division, taxonomy, alignment activities, asset by asset, and you can check if you consider how we can have applied. It's very transparent. It's also 170 pages, but if you know what are you looking for, you will find it. Okay, but believe me, it's only a question that to find the opportunity and to the right moment. And now I think that this is the better moment to start this exercise.
Fantastic, Luis. You've certainly convinced me that this is a viable alternative for corporates. We're going to have a little bit of discussion afterwards. Is that the Red Delgado has asked about SMEs for banks and the challenge from there. So Helena, park that one. We've got to come back to how we deal with that issue. But it's fantastic. And by the way, this is not just about reporting to regulators and to investors. It's about investors reporting as well. We're going to ask Brenda to give us a bit of thinking about that. And you can take advantage of those instruments that Helena was talking about, green bonds, for example. And one of Acciona's competitors recently put out a green bond that was 11.5 times oversubscribed. People have been worried that in the crisis, the idea of thematic issuance would go. In fact, it's blossoming. So we've seen all sorts of thematic issuance built on top of the green bond idea, COVID bonds, recovery bonds, social bonds, plus we see green bonds beginning to grow. And this is another opportunity for people who haven't taken advantage of that market in the past to use the taxonomy to guide what they do in the future. There's already been one taxonomy compliant bond issued in, oddly enough, in the United Kingdom. But from an asset owner perspective, Brenda, is it as simple as it is for Acciona? I realize it wasn't really that simple, Jose Luis, but what have you got to do from an asset owner perspective? What have you been doing, in fact?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean. Maybe we can go to the next slide. I think, you know, if the idea works that's behind taxonomy and it works together with the NFRD, ideally we would get this information from companies like Acciona telling us that they've done their assessment, they're X% aligned, are compliant with do no significant harm criteria, and did look at the social safeguards. In that ideal world, our job would basically be what's pictured here. So we would have a percentage revenue for every company in our portfolio that tells us how much is aligned. We would look at the weight in the portfolio. So you see here, this portfolio consists out of 3 companies, one 30% weight, 50% weight, 20% weight. We kind of weighted, multiply these percentages and we would get a final number. So that sounds quite easy. Obviously, most portfolios don't consist out of 3, but consist out of thousands of companies. So it's a large exercise, and we have to keep that in mind. That's one. The other one is that currently under NFRD, and I'm not sure whether that's going to change, it's only listed companies, which are still, you know, it's around 5,000-6,000 companies in the European Union, but it leaves aside SMEs, private equity, venture capital. So there's still a large part to be discovered when it comes to data availability, and be discovered and developed actually when it comes to data availability. So I think that's the second point that we have to keep in mind when, you know, showing this ideal picture. And well, you asked what we've been doing. We're currently already screening our portfolio for SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals related investments. So we do have instruments to kind of screen our portfolio that consists of like 6,000 companies currently. And we're trying to see whether we can kind of use these algorithms and machines basically to kind of take the taxonomy subset out of that. So what it actually does is that we need to first align these two taxonomies, right? And that's an interesting exercise. So it does definitely move something also within our own organization.
Are you doing this across everything? I mean, you've got a plus $500 billion portfolio. I mean, that is a lot of it's overseas too, not just European.
Yeah, for the SDI, so for SDG investments, we do it for all of our investments. I have to be honest that obviously, as we don't have full data coverage, sometimes we have to estimate, or we use public information that we screen through artificial intelligence actually to see whether we can do, get a view of the percentage of revenue from companies. And we do that worldwide. We're actually together with APG setting up an asset owner platform that would allow other asset owners to access this information as well.
Fantastic. That's really good to know. So if they search for APG, PGGM,
asset owner platform, SDI. Yeah.
So you've got to, so you're not waiting for Acciona to prepare the data and give you what you need. You're hunting anyway.
Yeah,
so
we are. Yeah.
And you're not taking this seriously. You want to make sure that PGGM gets the right data and that you're not entirely reliant on the artificial intelligence finding, right?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, we do that. I think many with us, Bloomberg does it obviously as well, and we do it. Our clients. So if I'm not in the client side, asset owner side, I would be client, but it's expected from us. So we do have a goal set on how much euros we want to commit to SDI related revenues, companies with SDI related revenues. And so, it's expected from us that we hunt for these data and do the best we can. Yeah.
I mean, we do have a phase-in period in Europe, don't we? Because we know that data availability for not everyone's going to be able to use your AI tools. We do need to encourage. So just tell us what that phase-in tool looks. What do people need to know about this?
Yeah, I think maybe if we go to the next slide, because obviously this is the easy part. I've said already, it doesn't cover every possibility, and I think where the challenge lies also for our own tooling is that the do no significant harm data and minimum safeguards are much harder to check. They're sensible, they're super important, but it's harder to get the information. And especially if you look at do no significant harm, it's in supply chain, social safeguards often as well. You have to go deep into the supply chain, understand the industry. And so if you don't get that data, it's not always easy to access them. Now you can obviously try to buy them from ESG rating agencies or other data providers, which might be expensive. But I think that's the number one option you have at this moment to comply with this. What we've done, or what we have advised to the Commission when we developed this, also recognizing the time lapse between the implementation of the NFRD and the start of the compliance phase for financial institutions, is that we actually said, maybe as the transition phase, it would be already good if you can estimate your substantial contribution. And so if you think a company substantially contributes, but you cannot 100% check step 4 and 5, do no significant harm and minimum safeguards, there should be a bucket that is called potentially aligned, or at least where you say, we think the revenues are aligned. We haven't been able to 100% check the other ones, but we do think it should be in there. And that's been our advice to the Commission. It's obviously up to them whether they will take it. But I definitely hope so, especially for the transition period, because I think it's essential to get this going.
So we've had a question here about how this would work with NFRD, particularly for banks' reporting requirements and so on. Can you pick up that question? Because I know you've been looking very closely at NFRD.
Yeah, for the bank side, I think Helena is well suited. But if I look at the company side, we've worked on, if we have to report on on how much a company is aligned, we would want to get this data from the company because they're best suited to do the do no significant harm check and do their minimum safeguards check. So ideally, the NFRD would oblige companies to report in a taxonomy aligned way, and that's also the way it's looking. I'm thinking it's going that way. I don't know how exactly it works for banks, Helena. Could you say something about that?
I think that if I may clarify, because I also seen some questions that show that there's a little bit of confusion in terms of the different pieces of regulation. So I think that it's important to understand that the disclosure and taxonomy is imposed by the taxonomy regulation, not by the NFRD, which basically means that companies, irrespectively of what happens with the revision of the non-financial reporting directive, then they will have to disclose in the course of 2022 the percentage of CAPEX and OPEX and revenues, as Jose Luis mentioned. Now, and as Brenda said, it is the taxonomy regulation that obliges financial markets, and by financial markets, meaning grossly speaking, asset owners and asset managers, to disclose the percentage of their alignment of their funds. Now, not of all funds, it is compulsory for those funds who either have an environmental objective or claim to have an environmental characteristic. Mainstream funds can opt out, basically, if they say, we don't integrate environmental risks, grossly speaking. Now, because the obligations in terms of corporates, but the non-FRD link, it says all companies that are obliged to report under non-FRD will have to report under the taxonomy regulation. So that is the link. The link is that if the NFRD is extended, so it includes, as it is, the goal to extend the coverage, then all these new companies will have to report, on the taxonomy. So that's the first point. The second point is that banks and insurance companies are not obliged in terms of the financial products. They are not in the taxonomy regulation in that front. How they relate to the taxonomy is because they have to report. So only those banks and insurance companies that are obliged to report under the non-financial reporting directive will have to report on the taxonomy. And for obvious reasons, banks cannot report the percentage of CAPEX, on taxonomy activities. So a new indicator is being developed. And this is where we are today. This is the famous Article 4 Delta that now has become, I heard, Article 8, is under discussions. And we won't have the results of that discussions until the delegated acts, level 2 are actually published. Now, what we are thinking from the banking industry, that type of indicator, will have to be something around the percentage of the corporate lending portfolio that responds to the taxonomy, or something around the percentage of the assets that respond to the activities, excluding some assets that make no sense, like liquid reserves, that are compulsory for banks to keep on central banks and so forth.
Helena, will the proposed European Banking Authority regulation coming in, I think, next year around disclosure and so on, have an impact here? Will it be relevant, do you think? I mean, I appreciate nothing's final. Just what do you know?
Well, that's a very good question, because from my perspective, and this is now I answer from a personal understanding, there are two key things that they're coming for banks. So first one is, as you're mentioning, the type of disclosures, yeah? And having seen the disclosures, finally the indicators, the list of mandatory indicators for asset managers and asset owners under the disclosures regulation, it will make a little sense that they vary very much, right? I mean, we expect certain type of alignment between the disclosures regulation, the NFRD update, and obviously the banks, disclosure regulations. The second area, which is more relevant to what we're discussing, is going to be what sort of modifications to prudential rules, if done, are going to happen, and whether or not there's going to be a green supporting factor or a brown penalizing factor. That's something that is yet to be seen. And my understanding is that we won't see it until 2025. There is a bigger, timeline for that discussion.
Well, we have seen, interestingly enough,
yes,
the Hungarian central bank already do a risk weighting differential requirement for green mortgage bonds as an incentive in the area. And lots of discussions.
Absolutely. And just one last thing, actually very interesting as part of the announcements, but one thing that they did say is that there's some parts of the Renew Sustainable Finance Strategy that might be brought forward because of the urgency.
There you go.
We don't know yet which ones.
And if you want to know about incentives, China's the place to look. For the last 5 years, we've had a laboratory experiment. 5 provinces, each the size of Germany, have been given the job of developing potential incentives and trialing incentives. We'll be publishing a report later this year on how that's gone, but they've been trialing everything from central bank incentives, discount capital, the liquid lending window for banks who post green bonds, to guarantee schemes, to green finance, and so on. We already have, as a result of all of this work, China being the largest green bond market in the world, and it has green loans, identified green loans, 10 times the value of the green bond market. This has all happened in the last 5 years, with incentives being a big part of it. So I think we'll see that message spreading around the world, and as people get more serious about addressing climate change and shifting our financial system, we're going to get a lot more of these with proof of concept. Let's see what the Chinese have been able to prove here later this year. So let's go into a bit of detail. I want to talk about do no significant harm. I think that's the next slide, isn't it, Brenda?
Yes.
This has been a challenging area for some institutions, notably banks, who are saying, how do I get hold of the data in this area? Jose Luis gave us a great outline of how that could work in an organization with an asset base, albeit a complex asset base. As you said, these are broadly common sense items. But what does it mean if you are a bank in Italy and you're trying to figure out which of your loans might qualify? You've identified the headline threshold. What do you do with the other thresholds? How's this going to work in practice, Helena?
So the first thing that everyone needs to understand that when it comes to do not significant harm, there are 3 types of criteria. On one hand, qualitative, then quantitative, which are the least, and then process-based. Basically, process-based is we're going to find process-based approach for everything that is adaptation. Yes? So the vast majority, around 70%, is qualitative. What we've done is we look at what is best practice following the ISO environmental management indications, but also the OECD multinational guidelines that I have to recall everyone that also include environmental protection, that have the most developed guidelines on how they need to apply. And what we suggest is that for everything that it is actually qualitative, to conduct thorough due diligence. And I'll touch on that in a second. When it comes to quantitative, it's as simple as you need to verify it. I mean, the importance of quantitative do not significant harm is the same as a threshold when it comes to substantial contribution, yeah? Whether you meet it or you not meet it. It's the 80% that Jose Luis was talking about on the waste recovery for building the subways. What we found when we did our test is that it was actually the process based on adaptation that it was harder to verify, simply because companies don't tend to provide information. And this just shows what our dear tech colleague Nancy kept on saying, yeah, that adaptation is seen like the little sister that everyone forgets, you know, in the world of climate.
We're on the line. This is Nancy, who's a climate change expert at the European Investment Bank.
Absolutely. I mean, the European Investment Bank and Cynthia and Nancy and so forth have done fantastic work, as has CBI, you know, Anna. Anyway, it just proves that what the taxonomy is going to help is to put adaptation much higher on the agenda, because what we're seeing is that the climate impacts are already hitting, you know, and that physical risk and measuring those physical risks and dealing with them is becoming more and more important. And this is exactly why on the Green Deal, you know, adaptation is actually upgraded, yeah? So I would say adaptation and the quantitative, you need to, if you don't have information, pick up the phone, ask the company. Now, when it comes to qualitative, do not significant harm, the process is exactly the same as for the minimum safeguards. And if you allow me, I'm going to take 1 minute to make two very important comments about the minimum safeguards. The first one is that on the political agreement at the end, the Commission, the European Council, and the Parliament agreed to expand minimum safeguards to include the OECD multinational guidelines and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which many of us at the TEG have asked for. Now, there's nothing more comprehensive out there. No more, any other guidelines, official guidelines actually being, ratified and endorsed by 50 countries, including almost all European countries, than the OECD multinational guidelines. They cover all social issues and many governance issues. So the point I wanted to say is that the taxonomy, yes, it's a green taxonomy. It does not cover social activities, but it does have the highest standards when it comes to social and governance issues. So that's one point. The second point is that, unfortunately, by the very nature of these issues, it's not as easy as ticking a list. You need to conduct due diligence. This is what the majority of us do. PGGM, BNP Paribas Asset Management are doing today. We might just need to upgrade them and follow more in details the due diligence process and guidance that the OECD provides. They have a specific report on how investors can do it. They have a specific guidance for lending and credit institutions. They have a specific guidance for companies. Now, where I join some of the concerns that they are out there is that it is very hard to measure where you set the bar in terms of how much you need to do in order to confirm that your due diligence process is correct, and that actually that one company, when you assess it, you can consider it that it aligns with the taxonomy. I believe that whether it's the future platform or the Commission will have to provide further guidance on that. Now, having said that, and one of the reasons why it's so hard is because the OECD multinational guidelines and the minimum safeguards include the principle of proportionality. They also include the need for remediation. So basically they're saying, if you find that a company or a public sector, when conducting a project is violating one of the principles, we discourage you to divest. We encourage you to engage, and try to remedy. So the key question is, what do you do when you find out there's been a breach in the past, whether or not you engage and therefore, you consider it's a line or not, exactly how that will work. We don't have yet all the answers, but as said, we expect further guidance on that.
Brenda, you're doing this already, aren't you? Engaging on these kinds of issues.
Yes, we do.
So this is not new for you. This is just normal practice.
Yeah, this is normal practice, but I mean, it takes some consideration which companies you're engaging with, because obviously we can't, there's a limit in what we can do with engagement. So we work a lot in coalitions with other investors, like Climate Action 100, IIGCC. There's a lot of, in collaborations on different topics that we use. Also within the Netherlands, there's a specific component regarding the OECD guidelines where we do a specific engagement on these kind of topics. Yeah.
And if I may add very quickly, sorry, I just wanted to add very quickly that, interesting enough, the disclosures regulation is very much aligned with the OECD guidelines. So basically what I'm saying we can say to all investors is that forget it that you have to do it for the taxonomy. You're going to have to do it for all your investments.
Exactly, you do have to do it. It's actually the disclosure regulation is broader than the OECD guidelines.
Yes.
It adds a couple of indicators to it. So that's definitely true. Yeah.
I mean, there are still some challenges for some institutions, and in the guidance that we're suggesting is provided about the implementation of taxonomy, we're looking to address those, aren't we? I mean, I know in the water area, we've said that in the adaptation and resilience requirements for infrastructure, in the building sector, I should say, we're looking more towards member states addressing those than necessarily the banks or the construction companies. So there's an implementation question about the do no significant harm provisions that is yet to be teased out. It's got to be there, it's a principle, but if it's floodplain protection, you actually kind of want a planning law or a planning guidance. You don't necessarily want to rely on individual householder figuring out their own floodplain. And that goes back to proportionality.
What we're doing with taxonomy is that we're actually enabling these sector pathways, right? So what we need as an investor is kind of a future view of where is the government going. And just saying we should invest in coal doesn't mean that it's not there. As long as the government says it's still a legal activity to perform in the economy, there will always be people that want to earn money with it. So what we need in these kind of sectors is a pathway where the government says we're going to phase it out over 20 years. It's worked in Germany for nuclear energy. It should work for coal as well. Yeah. And so I think same goes for steel, for aluminium, cement. You can't do change from one day on another. You need steps in between. And I think we have made a very good start with taxonomy, start this thinking on pathways and sectors where you actually think along the whole supply chain on where are the turning points, where can we make this change and save these emissions, because that's what we need. And
we've also mapped out transitions as a language for doing that.
Exactly.
And that's the critical thing. So if people are interested in transition investments or transition bonds, do look at the language of the taxonomy.
Yeah.
It is not a separate pile. You can't have transitions that aren't still addressing the Paris Agreement and where we're going. But there are many complex and longer period transitions that we have to identify and support.
Yeah.
Through.
And I think maybe if I can make one more other comment, I see a question in the Q&A. Which indicator is more important if you look at CapEx, EBITDA, or revenues? And I find that very, very important question. So thank you for that question, because I think currently we're looking at revenues mostly, but most of that data is backward looking. And if we want to enable this transition, we need to start looking forward. So I think CapEx we added CapEx as a way to kind of, enable forward-looking thinking and enable companies that are in a transition to raise a green bond for this transition towards, taxonomy-aligned production. And so I hope actually that CapEx and forward-looking indicators will become much more important and enable companies to change and raise that money.
We need to look to wrap up. We're getting towards to the hour. For those people who have to drop off now, please do. We might go a few minutes over because there's some very interesting questions in here. One of the questions, Jose Luis, is about costs in all of this and who's going to bear the cost and so on. In your case, you've invested quite a lot at an early stage in doing this. On an ongoing basis, do you see this as an extra cost to the sustainability work you're doing? What's your advice to other corporations?
I think that when you are discovering something new, you can say that probably you see taxonomy as complex and costly. But we were very, very transparent. We spent around 300 hours to produce all the exercise. The first time we hired a consultant. It's true. We need some extra work to do that. But the second exercise at the end of the day with our auditors was done by our own groups, our own teams, no external aid. I think that the most challenging thing is not the cost. I see that this feel the music, maybe. Feel the music. If you see that something is changing, if you see that the trend is going there, I think that you can take this exercise into your strategy, not only as a reporting exercise, and then your mindset should change. To give you an example, Brenda said just a few moments ago about the pathways. Let me give you an example. During this year, we expect to flat our CO2 emissions by 8%. 8%.
Wow.
After no, it's about all the world. Okay, 8% with COVID, with all the planet stopped by 3 months, only 8%.
And we're supposed to be doing 7.6% minimum every year, right?
Yes, this is the case. You can see what is the size of the transformation we need to achieve. If you see that, if you feel the music, that this is in the right direction, probably you will find a lot of arguments, and the cost will be not the main barrier. We are talking about a couple of hundred hours of talented people in your company working in the strategy of the long-term future of the company. I think this is very worthy.
I know in a survey we published just recently on green bond issuance with 86 treasurers, because most people are concerned about the cost there up front, every treasurer was saying actually the costs were negligible or worth it because of the deeper engagement they had of investors like Helena and Brenda, and the richer relationships and the in a sense, the easier ability to raise funding and so on that comes with that. So there are a lot of pluses on this side. I mean, most organizations have a sustainability capacity of some sort because there's reporting. In a sense, this is just a different model of how you report, I guess, Jose Luis. Is that a reasonable thing to say?
Yes, I think so. We need to wonder if we are facing a new generation of ESG products. Because if ESG indicators are in the mainstream, because you have evidence that if you don't take into account this information in all of your asset analysis, you are failing. At the end of the day, the new generation of the green asset, of the ESG asset, will be focused on not about how you are doing things, it's about what are you contributing. Yeah. And I think that if we are transforming or we are evolving to this new kind of products, I think that the taxonomy is the central point. I like to say the Greta Thunberg acid test. Okay, if you are not convinced that your portfolio is fully aligned with this new framework, probably your clients, your investors, everything around your products will be not credible. And I think that this is the key. We are changing, and this is the magic or the beauty of the tech work and the Commission vision. That we are changing the real ESG investment of the future, more linked to the impact, to the contribution, to the additionality, rather than qualitative criteria that we are applying now.
I think.
Helena?
Yeah. Yes, I wanted to say a couple of things. First, in terms of the companies, yeah. I mean, I think that one thing that everyone has to understand is that the taxonomy has two pillars. It's based on two pillars. On one hand, environmental objectives, the EU environmental objectives, and on the second one, science. Yeah. So basically, the taxonomy is a tool that helps identify, how the different economic activities will contribute to those environmental activities. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, in a way, the taxonomy is a risk management tool. It preempts coming regulation. I mean, everyone has to understand when it comes to climate mitigation, the goal is, 2050 carbon neutrality. At 2030 will be 50%, reductions, emissions reduction. That comes with what? We're saying carbon pricing, we're talking about carbon tax, we're talking about sectorial policies and regulations. So in a way, it is on the best interest of the company. But even if I put that aside, when I was talking about how the taxonomy is one piece of the bigger puzzle, well, basically what we're saying is that companies, at the end of the day, because of all the interlinks, it is the best interest of companies, not only to apply the company, but also to report on the taxonomy. Because those companies with a higher percentage of taxonomy earnings will effectively enjoy substantial higher gearing in terms of the financial leverage, yeah? and it will have a lower funding cost. In other words, you know, a substantial advantage in cost of capital. And this is what we're really talking about. When you think about how it's going to be implemented by banks, by credit rating agencies, the changes in investment advice, in monetaries, and you start looking at the whole picture, yeah, then you got your answer. I mean,
that's a bold prediction from someone representing a $500 billion asset manager there for everyone. Take those words to heart. Brenda, do you agree? Is this true?
Well, I think it's definitely the movement, and what I wanted to say. So I think, you know, what we're looking at is environmental data, and so ESG data are becoming as important as financial data. And that will move the way that capital flows, definitely. So in that way, I agree. And again, to this forward looking, what we see happening in the benchmarks, for example, is that companies with science-based targets on environmental, they will be overweighted in the EU benchmark constructions. So you will attract more money eventually, I think, if you have your ESG reporting in order, but also set science-based targets for forward-looking change. And so, yes, I think I wouldn't dare to be as bold as Helena, but I do agree on that. You know, this is the motion that we're going to, and the importance of sustainability data. So anyone who would tell you it costs too much, look at what you pay for your financial data, right? I mean, if it's equally important, it should earn an equal investment as well.
We need to go to final comments, but just before that, one question, Brenda. Will this leach into the passive investment sector? A quarter of the world's capital or something like that is in passive investment now, but you don't quite have the same data visibility at the moment. You just mentioned benchmarks and EU benchmark strategy for indices for Europe. Can we see, what do you think about this question of passive investing? Definitely.
I have no doubt it will go into passive investing. I mean, parties like Backlog are looking into this, and they, you know, if they start creating products, they move billions, if not trillions, if people step into this. So definitely. And I think that the benchmark regulation and the creation of these labels is actually an amazing step for passive investment, because we're creating a new market standard in the European Union. And I don't think any sustainable benchmark or index in Europe will go without that label anymore. So I think, and that is obviously closely linked to taxonomy and what's defined there. So I think this package of, you know, the green bonds, the benchmarks, and the taxonomy will definitely change European capital markets towards green. Yeah.
Thank you. Jose Luis, parting thoughts, advice to other companies. What do you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the first and more useful advice is, please read the technical report, because sometimes if you have a look to the document, you will you will read very sensible things, very in good order, very structured and very simple to apply. My first advice is, have a look to the documents, and don't trust on what you have you are listening or reading about the complexity of the taxonomy, because probably you will be surprised. And the second, probably my view is that when we started last year talking about the taxonomy to our investors, our own investors, probably we have a lot of training to provide. But now we are feeling that more and more investors are interested about how you have calculated the figures. We had our AGM this morning. Our AGM, our first virtual AGM for the references of our managing director and also the chairman in the speeches is the best proof that the taxonomy gives you an opportunity to explain your company better. And I think that this is also another collateral benefit that help you to explain what are you doing, how you see the world, and then the competitive advantages of the current times. And I think that this is also a benefit. My advice is, is worth a try.
Great thoughts. Helena, parting comments.
What I would say is that for the very first time in Europe, we have one clear objective: carbon neutrality, and the transition or the creation of a low carbon, environmentally sustainable and much more inclusive economic model. And for once, we have one policy framework. And this is what we're seeing with the Green Deal, what we're seeing with all the strategies for each one of the environmental objectives, specific goals, but also increasingly full alignment with the different sectorial policies, beyond the carbon markets and so forth. So what we have, what the taxonomy is just a tool. So we all speak the same languages and we all work towards the same goals that have been defined by the EU at the highest level, And thanks to all the different pieces of regulation, whether you're a bank, whether you're a credit rating agency, whether you're providing investment advice, or whether you are a normal citizen, European citizen, all of us can contribute to the realization of the goals, through the taxonomy, thanks to the taxonomy as the common tool.
Beautiful. Brenda, farewell thought.
Yeah, I started doing this job because I wanted to make an impact, and I've thought a long time where to do that. And looking back at the 2 years that we had working on this taxonomy, I think none of us actually had ever thought that this would be the results. And so I'm grateful that we're part of this movement, and I really hope that we can help people start being part of it as well, because as Helena said, we can all contribute. So I hope taxonomy can help organizations and individuals making better choices.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you, Helena, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone on the call. This is the end. On the screen in front of you, if you can see it, you'll see some links to download reports. The key thing is climatebonds.net/webinars. If you go there, you will, by Monday, be able to download this whole talk, and there are links to podcasts, or you can just go to Spotify or Apple or Google and search for Climate Bond webinars, and you'll find them. Please go out there and make the world a better place. We've done a bit of work here, but there's a hell of a lot more to be done. And now's the time to seize the opportunity in the midst of this understanding of what we can do with our air, with our emissions, with our world, despite the crisis that's been the background to it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Join in next week.
Thank you.
This time next week. Au revoir.
Bye.